Okay, so for my next statement, we're going to stick with technologies, and my next statement will be emerging technologies will solve a lot of clinical trial challenges. I have one up, three up. Excellent. So I agree with that, but again, with a little hesitation, because we have some great emerging technologies right now. Machine learning and AI are two of the hottest topics, I think, in the clinical space. Even though I think the AI part of it might be a few years off, it seems like there's a lot of companies really doing great things with machine learning in clinical trials, not just recruiting patients, but planning out things way in advance than we ever could in the past. So Rebecca, I'm going to start with you again. I don't know what other new technologies you're dealing with and what companies are coming to you with and wanting to try, but what are some of the work burdens you think you can be relieved of by having new technologies being put in place at the site level?
So I think one big one for us is kind of like an AI pre-screening. So of course, patient recruitment is probably most important to the sites and to the sponsors. And so we're working with a company on AI pre-screening who can kind of infuse with a lot of different EMR systems. And rather than hiring multiple staff and spending hours digging through patient charts, we are able to do this where it takes pretty much every inclusion-exclusion criteria and identifies potential patients at the start of that one time, and then it does it in real time. So if there's a new patient that comes into the clinic that day, it will find that patient after that patient's visit. So that's I think a really tremendous technology that we've come across that will really reduce our time. There's always a lot of other technologies. So I guess I can see how I could potentially thumbs this down as well, because every sponsor and CRO is creating these new platforms and softwares. And I mean, every single study comes with, 2 to 8 different softwares. And when you're working on multiple studies, it's a tremendous headache. It's a lot to onboard. It's a lot to train on. So it's kind of like at the same time, I want all the sponsors to come together and create a novel platform that's actually useful for the site, not more work for the site.
Are there any technologies right now, because I feel like we may have touched on one when we talked last fall, but are there any technologies right now that are being used across multiple sponsor companies rather than just for one specific one?
Yeah, so there's an initiative that's been going on for probably, maybe 7 years or so, and working to try to collaborate. I think there's about 14 different sponsors, and they've been working on it and they've been trying, but the platform that they've created is not, honestly, I think it's more work than the old-fashioned way of working individually. It's supposed to have one username and password, and you can get into the different sponsors and different sites. And in theory, it's great, but in practicality, it's not working. Okay. So it hasn't been that great.
And just one more question on that. You mentioned, I think in our first segment about reimbursement, and it seems like you're very big believer in sites being properly reimbursed for these technologies. When you look at the implementation of the technologies, the work and cost involved for the sites, are you guys being adequately compensated for that by the companies that you work with?
Sorry, Chris and Sam, but no. I think, not that the pharma and CROs have, pockets or big pockets, but much bigger than the sites. And so I think any technology that increases enrollment and reduces study timelines reduces the cost on the sponsor. And so from that standpoint, it shouldn't come out of the pockets of the site. So right now, when the site, when we're looking at this AI pre-screening, that's coming out of our pocket that we're getting reimbursed. We're not getting reimbursed additional for that. So I think that the sites and the sponsors and CROs need to really collaborate better and look at what these technologies are doing for the sponsors.
And Sam, I always feel bad for sites when I hear about all the different technologies they're using for the different sponsor companies, all the sign-ins, all the training and everything else. Is there a better way for us to handle this and what we're asking sites to do?
I think there is. So we are all very well aware of the portal system. It seems like every company, every entity has its own portal, different usernames, different passwords. What we have seen in the past 24 months is an increase in technology that is leveraging AI to basically read your email. So we are seeing certain platforms where you're able to just work out of your email system, and then the documentation or the information within that are able to then be filed within the appropriate system within the CRO sponsor or whichever company is using that platform. And I think we're going to see more of that. Some of the portals out there are very, very good, but I think that, and I'll leave this to Rebecca to answer this question, it's got to be a bit frustrating when you have a number of different portals to have to log into and to access.
Yeah, it's frustrating to the site, but imagine these investigators, they're running clinics and trying to conduct research. I mean, I know I work with some investigators and it's just become way too much. The amount of training that's required for all these systems, the onboarding training, the ongoing training, it's just the monitoring visits, and now with these remote monitoring visits, and it's really become a lot to the investigator.
Yeah, and just to expand a little bit more, and Chris, I know you also have a bit of a CRO background as well. There is also the push to make sure that the information within the CRO is getting into the right system. Because I think CTMS, other systems like that of record, we want to make sure they're always updated and completely up to speed. That doesn't always happen. And sometimes we've got to make sure that we're looking to close those loopholes.
I had another question for you, Chris, but do you want to go ahead and address anything that the other two said?
From a sponsor perspective, and this is not an advertisement for any one of these firms. I've not used them. I've looked at them and see some utility. There's companies that are called CluePoint, SAMA, and Leucovant. And these companies, what they do is they monitor all the data that are coming in from and I see Sam shaking his head. They monitor the data that are coming in from multiple sources. And then there are some statistical algorithms that they can run from the sponsor's perspective to say, that site right there is an outlier. And you might want to go and look at that particular site. So for example, say you've got a drug or even you're operating in an indication where there's going to be a lot of serious adverse events. And all of a sudden over here, I mean, the average serious adverse event would be 2 per patient, on average. Well, here's about 4 or 5 sites that have no serious adverse events. And you might not pick that up if you're running a 100-site study, which is very common in small phase 3 or large phase 2 studies. And so these kind of tools are new and they're innovative. I will also say many of the CROs are developing some of these tools themselves. They have their own homegrown platform for doing this. So yeah, there's definitely benefit from a sponsor perspective with the new emerging tools that are coming out.
And the question I was going to ask you had to do with therapeutic area, because I feel like when we talk about new technologies and getting them into sites and whatnot, I feel like we're grouping all these therapeutic areas together and talking about how this technology is going to benefit them. But all of them are different. I mean, even when we talk about decentralized trials and letting patients participate from home, if they're participating in an oncology trial, for example, in some cases that's just not possible. So how are the benefits of these technologies impacted by the therapeutic area that we're working in? Is that an issue?
I guess it would depend on, I don't actually see it as an issue, Ed. I do see that the tools that are being, it may be, let me go there, it may be. I think the tools that are being developed will handle at least 3 standard deviations of most patients, unless there's an issue where the patient can't remotely, if you've got someone with very severe rheumatoid arthritis, might not be able to handle a device, particularly a handheld ePro sort of device. But for the most part, I think these tools are being developed with patients in mind. One downside that I would bring to the tools is that as a sponsor, that this caught me a little bit by surprise. Just because a tool has been FDA approved, and I'm thinking like a glucose monitor, has been FDA approved, you think, oh, wow, that's great. I can use that tool in my clinical trial. Has that tool actually been tested to the electronic specifications of data transfers to the different places? And some of these companies that are kind of one-off companies may not have done a sophisticated enough job of testing their tools that you want to employ in your clinical trial as it relates to data management. So that is something I would caution sponsors and people that are running clinical trials to be thinking about.
And Sam, let me go back to you for one last question before we move on to the next one. Somebody just asked a question or actually made the comment asking about Transcelerate. And I don't know if you're familiar with them or if the others are, but they say, what about using the platforms like Transcelerate for sponsors to come on common platforms, adopt harmonized processes like digital data flow, common protocol template, and of course, leveraging the power of AI and machine learning. Have any of you followed what Transcelerate is doing? And is that going to be a possible solution in the future for some of the issues we discussed?
So that's actually the platform I was just talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
So you can jump in, Sam, now. But that's
I
what I was talking about.
Yeah, I've followed it. I've read about it. I'm keeping up with it, but I mean, I don't have any firsthand knowledge.
Yeah, so it's the Transcelerate initiative that has created the shared investigator platform, which is supposed to unite all these various pharmaceutical companies. And again, in theory, it's great. They do have some documentation. So they have a delegation log that's a Transcelerate delegation log, and the pharmaceutical companies that are part of Transcelerate, I've started kind of going to use the same delegation log. So that's beneficial. But in terms of the logins and the shared investigator platform, which was created through Transcelerate, that has, I think, some room for growth.